Well, good morning, brothers and sisters. Today we're reading Proverbs 10 together. And for my reading and meditation, I want us to focus on a couple of verses that have relationship to each other. And that's Proverbs 10, verses 4 and 5, and then Proverbs 10, verse 22. So Proverbs 10, verses 4 and 5, the proverb says, "A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a prudent son. He who sleeps in harvest will, I think, bring shame or poverty." I can't quite remember. And then Proverbs 10:22, the blessing of the Lord makes rich. He adds no sorrow with it. Just really quickly, I mean, the two basic ideas here, and I'll just use, common language that we have probably said and didn't realize there are principles behind them, biblical principles. Hard work pays off. That's really what Proverbs 10, 4 and 5 says. Hard work pays off. And then really Proverbs 10:22 is really emphasizing that God does bless people. Very simple is that we serve a generous God who delights in lavishing his blessing on people. And interestingly enough, even the scriptures tell us God has common grace for all mankind. In other words, he sends his rain on the just and the unjust. And he showers his goodness over all that he has made. And so I think the two things I want us to see here is hard work and the blessing of the Lord, and how we see these connected to each other. So again, Proverbs 10, verses 4 and 5 are laying forth a general principle, a self-evident reality on the nature of hard work, careful planning, seizing the opportunity, and then, again, the self-evident general truth. Hard work pays off. If you work hard, if you're, as the proverb says, diligent. What does that mean to be diligent? A diligent hand, if you will. It is someone who stays with it and sticks to it. Someone who sets their mind to accomplish a task, and their passions and their plans turn into actions. It turns into productivity. So you might say the hand of the diligent, or the hand of the one who is using their abilities, using their time well, is someone who takes what is obligations put on them, responsibilities put on them, plans in their hearts, passions in their hearts. They put all those together in the soup bowl of their mind or their heart, and then they act on it. They don't just sit there and dream. They don't just sit there and watch life pass by them. They don't just sit there and wait on other people to do the work. They take what is before them, responsibilities, obligations, or passions and plans, and then they put them into action, and they stay with it and they stick to it. The hand of the diligent. In other words, they're productive in accomplishing meaningful tasks that produce some form of a profit, produce some form of meaningful result. And that's why the proverb says the hand of the diligent makes rich. In other words, it produces something. It brings profit to the one who worked hard. The inverse, or the opposite there, is that slack hand. What is a slack hand? Well, it just really means a negligent hand, a hand that's idle, a hand that's not being used. And really, it's just using that imagery that we've already covered from Proverbs 6. Hard work, skillful living versus laziness, slothfulness, or the sluggard. And you see there in verse 5 how the imagery of a son who evidently works on a farm, probably working for his father in the family business. Verse 5 talks about this prudent son is the one who gathers in the summer. He gathers in the harvest. In other words, he knows that there is a particular point in time, a particular season that he has to be on his game in order to gather in the produce, gather in the profit in order to provide for his family, in order to store up what he's going to need in the off season. And so, yeah, we see the opposite then in verse 5, the son who just sleeps on the job. Instead of hard work pays off, their mentality is they're sleeping on the job. They're procrastinating. They're not paying attention to the opportunity before them. They are focused on trivial and meaningless things. They want handouts instead of putting their hand to the plow. And what's the result? Well, it's shame, it's poverty, it's missed opportunities, it's loss of goods, loss of profit. But then in verse 22, what's interesting is the proverb gives this really encouraging reminder that is taught throughout Scripture, and it's the blessing of the Lord makes rich. Guys, I think in some Christian circles, some people take the teachings of Jesus of, sell all that you have, give to the poor, and follow me, and you'll have treasure in heaven. And they absolutize, if I could use that word, or over-apply that to every person in every situation, not understanding context and the overarching theme of what Jesus is teaching. Jesus is not teaching every single Christian should become poor and homeless and live that kind of lifestyle just like Jesus in every generation. Again, Jesus was not married. He did not have children. Jesus is the Messiah. He came here for a particular task. Jesus had a purpose and a point in what he was teaching to that rich young ruler, which money and possessions in himself was his God, and God was not number one, and his neighbor was not a priority. And so when we think through that text, could God tell us to sell everything we have, give to the poor, and follow him? Absolutely. But we should not absolutize that one particular example, because it says very clearly, Proverbs 10:22, the blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow to it. In other words, when the Lord blesses us, that's not a curse. When the Lord blesses us, that's not punishment. When the Lord blesses us, that's a time for rejoicing, not rejecting. That's a time for thanksgiving, not sorrow. And you see this theme taught throughout the rest of the scriptures, where you see in 1 Timothy 6:17 to basically 19, Paul tells Timothy, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, prideful, arrogant, self-sufficient, nor to set their hope on the uncertainty of riches. Can't be guaranteed, won't always be here. Money is a terrible God. But he says to set your hope on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. So when you think about that, guys, in the Proverbs 10:22, the blessing of the Lord makes rich. And then you put also in there, Proverbs 10:4, the diligent hand makes rich. Well, which one is it? Well, both. Hard work is a gift from God. The energy to do it, the skill to do it, the opportunity to do it, the endurance to do it, that all came from God. So friends, think about this for a minute. Maybe you have worked a really hard day, a really hard week. Maybe you've been working a really long time, whether it's 20, 30, 40 years. And you're looking back over the toil of your hands and you're going, man, I want to be able to enjoy the fruits of my labors. Well, that's not a bad thing to do. That's not a bad thing to consider. Ecclesiastes would even commend that. 1 Timothy 6 would commend that. Enjoying the good gifts that God provides. Hard work, generally speaking, does pay off. So how do we put these things together? Hard work pays off, and in general terms, it produces a profit, which, generally speaking, means that we will have more profit than those who are lazy, who are procrastinators, who are idle with their hands. How do we take that, the blessing of the Lord makes rich, the hand of the diligent makes rich, and also the blessing of the Lord makes rich? Well, that just basically means this. We should ask the Lord to give us wisdom, endurance, to skillfully work hard in such a way that we are blessed by God in order to be a blessing to others. Because when we talk about riches as Christians, our understanding or our theology of wealth and blessing is different than the world. You see, for the Christian, our goal, our desire is to see our work redemptively in light of the gospel, the kingdom, and seeing his church built up. And so when you look in the New Testament and we start seeing this kind of New Testament biblical work ethic, the same truth is the same truths taught in the Old Testament too. Hard work generally does pay off. God is the one who does the blessing and generously increases our wealth and income however he sees fit. But I want you to notice at least one example in the New Testament of one man who probably worked really hard and probably came from a wealthy family and was greatly blessed by God. And notice what he did with his wealth. In Acts chapter 4, we see the early church, or at least that first few years when Pentecost takes place, the church in Jerusalem is birthed, and the early church, or the first century church, is meeting together, gathering together, sharing meals together, taking the Lord's Supper together, baptizing new converts, evangelizing, teaching and preaching, seeing the gospel spread, making disciples. And what's interesting is in Acts chapters really 2 and 4, you see, well, how did Christians take care of each other? How did Christians watch out for each other? And I've already just kind of established they did that through friendships, they did that through spiritual fellowship, but they also did that by using the prophets, using the wealth from their hard work as well as from God's blessing in order to share with those who had needs and to share with that community of faith. So in Acts 4, you see Barnabas, also known as the son of encouragement. And what do we see Barnabas do? We see this beautiful preview of a man who not only was a great encourager, who not only was well loved by many Christians in that first century church, but it says that many who were owners of lands and possessions and houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what they made to the apostles, laid it at the apostles' feet, and then the apostles gave discretion and oversight to where those proceeds would go to bless the needs of that church in Jerusalem and to meet whatever needs they had to continue seeing the gospel go forward. And we see Barnabas is raised up as an example. He was a Levite. Most likely he had land that was given to him from an inheritance, being from, the tribe of Levi. It could have also been he was a very hard worker who had saved money very well. And we don't see there that Barnabas became homeless and poor. But what we do see is a man who took the riches he had, who took the wealth he had, who took the blessings of Lord on his life and became a blessing to everyone around him. So brothers and sisters, think about that for a minute. There's a lot to think about in just these few verses in Proverbs. The hand of the diligent makes rich. The hand of the slack hand causes poverty. Hard work pays off. Being productive, having forethought, seizing the opportunity, giving it your all, asking for the Lord's blessing on your labors, your efforts, your skill, your energy. And yet we see that the blessing of the Lord makes rich for a purpose, both for our enjoyment, thanksgiving, and praise. He adds no sorrow to it. And yet we see the overarching biblical God-fearing ethic in the Old Testament and the New is to also, if we've been blessed through our labors or we've been blessed by the generosity of others, we should bless others so that they might experience the blessing of God even through our own hands. Hands that have worked really hard or hands that have received the hard work from others. So friends, what does that look like for you today? What does it look like for you and I to have diligent hands, setting our mind, putting plans and passions into action and producing a profit by the Lord's help and actually accomplishing tasks that are going to reap benefit, not just for us, but for those around us. I would challenge each one of us to even make that a prayer today. Lord, would you bless me today? Would you bless me this year? Would you bless me in the coming year? Whether that be with wealth, possessions, spiritual fruitfulness in my labors, whatever you've got your mind set to. Whether you're a homemaker, a business owner, a doctor, you're in ministry, you're in your retired years and you're thinking about how you can use that disposable income with a more kingdom mindset instead of merely and only kind of a self-centered bucket list. Not against bucket lists, but the main point is something beyond just doing what pleases you, but in a bigger way, what blesses others. So what does that look like for you? What does that look like for me? May God bless each one of us, our labors, that it may produce a harvest, a profit, that we may abound in whatever ways God wants to bless us in order that we might be a blessing to others for the glory of God. God bless.